Hi everybody, in today's video I'm showing you another feature of P5 2.0. If you're looking for all of my P5 2.0 videos, they're here on this track on the Coding Train website. If you want to read more about P5 2.0, I would suggest this post on the processing forums. Today I want to look at some new features for drawing text, in particular textContours, textModel, and textWeight. I don't really know these things, so I'm going to be kind of figuring it out as I go in this video. Here's an old-fashioned P5.1 sketch where I draw some text at an X and Y position with a given size. I can change the font by calling text font. And any font that is locally installed as part of my system, I can use, and now you see Choo Choo in Georgia or in Courier. If I want to go further than this, where do I find other fonts? I'm sure many of you will have great suggestions. Please put them in the comments, but fonts.google.com is probably a good starter place to find a wide selection of different fonts that you can load into your P5.js sketch. So for example, if I were to click on Roboto and then click Get Font, click Get Embed Code, I actually have the URL here from which I can load that font. So I'm going to go and copy this and put that in my sketch. Now, in olden times, I might have gone and added a preload function to load the font. But let's look at the reference for load font in P5.2. Fonts can take time to load. Await the result of load font in setup before using the result. And I just made a whole video all about await, so if that's unfamiliar to you, you can go and watch that. But right here, I'm just going to add let font equals await load font from that URL. If I'm going to use await in setup, I've got to flag that with the async keyword. And then I should be able to say text font, font. Aha! So why am I getting unsupported open type signature? Guess what I forgot to do? I forgot to update my sketch to P5.2. Now that that's done, there we go. Does that look like the Roboto font to you? Mr. Wheels asks, the font URL doesn't go into index.html? So yes, this is what this code is showing you to do. It's telling you to put the font into your HTML, and I'm sure it would be possible to do that. You had to do in P5.1 if you wanted to use a web font like that. This is what is new and different and kind of exciting about P5.2 is the load font function supports it directly, so you can avoid touching the HTML if you don't want to. Now, the feature I want to demonstrate is called variable fonts. So when picking a font, one thing I'm going to want to do here is filter by, under technology, variable. And let's pick a spooky font like Grenze Gotisch. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and there we go. You can center it horizontally and vertically. And one thing you might notice in the URL, it has this property weight between 100 and 900. That means what I've loaded is the font with a variable weight between a value of 100 and 900. So normally you think of the weight as just, is it bold? Is it medium bold, light bold, normal? But now we can assign a numeric value to the weight of the font. This is all covered here in the P5 reference under textWeight. So let's add that. Let's try 100. Let's try 900. Let's map it to the mouse location. Spooky. I forgot to mention that during a recent live stream, Kit Kuksanock, the P5.js lead, came on the Coding Train to talk about variable fonts and did a really nice demonstration of this. And what they did is they assigned the weight to a sine wave. So let me try that. I'm going to make a variable called angle, just start it at 0. I'm going to say the weight is the result of sine of that angle, which has a value between -1 and 1. And then now if I increase that angle every frame by a small amount, we can see Choo Choo is expanding and contracting autonomously. Many years ago, a much younger man made a video about steering behaviors. And it looks like this person over here traced the contours of letter forms as targets for agents to steer towards. Let's take a look at this example. Beautiful. So this example was made with P5 1.5. Let's update that to 1.11. Still works. Just out of curiosity, let's update it to 2. No, it's broken. So how does this work now in P5.2? It looks like in P5.1, we use this function textToPoints to somehow trace the contours of a font. How do we do that in P5.2? Okay, I simplified this example back down. The new function is textContours.
Text-to-points still exists in P5.2. It just does something a little different. I'll put information in the video description.
Returns an array of arrays of points outlining a string of text written using the font. Each point in the contour array has three properties: X, a Y, that's its location, and its orientation. Alpha? Its path angle? That's interesting. We're gonna have to come to that.
The alpha property is actually going to be called angle in 2.0, and I'll be showing how that works later in this video.
The fourth parameter, options, is also optional, but we can do a sample factor and a simplifyThreshold. Okay, let's explore this. For now, let's keep everything in setup. I'm just gonna give it a 0, 0. Oh, no font data available for Grenze Gotisch. So this particular font, for some reason, doesn't have any data available for it. Let's try downloading this font.
Google Fonts are served in a format called WAF2, which P5 doesn't support out of the box for text-to-contours. That's why I'm downloading the font in a different format that P5 does support. Now, there is a WAF2 add-on for P5 that you can use, and this might actually also change in the future in P5. I'll include more information in the video description.
So I think that if you want to do text-to-contours, you need to use a non-variable weight version of the font. Let me just use regular for right now. So I'm going to upload the regular version of the font. And then instead of loading this URL, let's load the font. Aha! I have an array of arrays. So inside this is all of the points. I think these must be all the points for this C, and then all the points for the H, and then the O. So now I can iterate over all of the points. Let's call this all points, and get each array of individual points for each letter. And now I should have each point here. And let's just see what happens now if I do point, draw point at the X and the Y. Look, they're all up here. So I said 0, 0 for where I want the text to be. Let's actually put it at 200, 200. And let's not draw the text here. Do you see? Does this say choo-choo? Getting closer. Let's make it bigger. Ah, I'm starting to see it now. Now let's look at what we've missed in the call to text-to-contours. This fourth parameter, options, has two properties: sampleFactor and simplifyThreshold. So I can make an object with those two properties, and I can pass them in as the last argument to the text-to-contours function. But it gave me an error. Collinear is not defined. Did we find a bug in P5 2.0 that exists at the time of this recording?
Yes, we did, and it's since been fixed.
Let's get rid of the simplifyThreshold. Okay, look at that. SampleFactor 1. Now, I don't know what the number 1 means. Let's go look that up. Is the ratio of the text path length to the number of samples. It defaults to 0.1. Higher values produce more points along the path.
There's an inconsistency in how the reference is written here. See if you can spot it. It trips me up as I try to give you my explanation, and I'll reveal the correct way to think about it after I'm done.
Let's say I have the letter H, or let's just do I because it's a simple letter. So we have the concepts of sampleFactor and simplifyThreshold. SampleFactor, let's just say we have between 0.1 and 1.0. And let's just look at just this segment. So if we have the sample factor set to 1, it's going to give me points, like every single point, essentially all the way along. If we have the sample factor of 0.1, it's going to give me the points 10% of the way. So in other words, I believe if we're going from here to here, we're essentially going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that was 11. But it's doing that for the entire letter form. So it's not like I'm getting more points along the top because it's a shorter segment. It's for the entire letter form. It's like, how frequently are we sampling? Are we sampling every 10%? Well, is it inverted? In my mind, it's inverted.
Remember when I read the reference? It said that sample factor is the ratio of the path length to the number of samples. Well, now you see that that's actually incorrect. It's inverted. And I've already filed a GitHub issue, and that's being corrected with new language. I also don't think it's exactly right to talk about it as a percentage of points. There's a really easy way to think about the math. The number of sampled points is approximately equal to the path length times sample factor. So if you have a path length of 100 and a sample factor of 0.1, about 10 points. Sample factor of 0.2, about 20 points. I'll include this P5 sketch in the video description so you can play around with the math itself.
So in fact, if we put this back in draw and make font a global variable, all I've done is put everything back into draw. I've made sample factor a variable, which actually could just be mouse x divided by the width to go from 0 to 1. And now we can see as I move my mouse up, I get more and more points. And I guess once we're getting even to like, 0.4, so this is where map comes in handy. Mouse x to go between 0 and width to between like 0 and maybe 0.4. I can now slowly see what that looks like. Let's try simplifyThreshold again. Not sure why that didn't work. Removes collinear points if it's set to a number other than 0. The value represents the threshold angle to use. Oh. No.
It's just that bug again. Check the video description for an example with simplifyThreshold that does work.
So I'm not sure why I can't get simplifyThreshold to work, but just to think about what it would do is imagine if I had this eye and I have all of these points. What does it mean for a point to be collinear? Well, we need more than 2 points. Now, any 2 points are collinear. That's the definition of a line. But these 3 points here are collinear. If I was drawing some kind of path, if I was drawing my own path, I don't really need that one in the center because I could just connect those 2 points and it's the same as having one in the center. So simplifyThreshold removes extra points that are collinear along the path according to some threshold angle. So even if my points were like this, maybe this angle, the change in the angle here is so small or so big that this point could be considered collinear. Well, it's not actually collinear, but it could be considered a point to remove to simplify the path. I think that's beyond what I need to worry about or do in any demonstrations I'm doing right now, but that's what simplifyThreshold could do for you. So let's see if we can fix this sketch from my coding challenge 59 to work with P5.2. First, we'll take the font and load it with Async. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Then we're going to change font text to points to the new textContours. And we don't give it the size of the font here. Instead, we have to make sure we specify the font and the size. Why is this still not working? Aha! The points previously came back as one big array, but now you get them as individual letters. So we'll add a nested loop. Oh, whoops. J is wrong. So with all of that new knowledge, I can update the coding challenge I showed you earlier to P5.2, add loading the font with async and await, and then use the new textContours function instead of the old text-to-points one. Let's look at one more thing about textContours. I'm going to go back to a fixed sample factor and make the all points array global. So I see choo-choo there and all of the points. For every point, I don't just have the X and the Y, I also have an angle. What can I do with that angle or alpha, which I'm not sure why there's two properties here. Let's just use the property called angle. So first of all, I could note that I can also say begin shape, end shape, and change point to vertex, change stroke weight to 1. And you can see now I'm actually starting to draw the letter forms themselves by connecting those dots. Of course, it's a little bit off in my sample factor, but just in terms of the possibilities of what you might want to do, that's an important point. But I'm more curious about this angle. So for example, what if I were to draw a rectangle for each one of these points? And let's do a single character. Let's just do the O, capital O, and let's make it much bigger. Let's change the sample factor down to a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to try to draw a thin rectangle for each one of these points.
You might be wondering, why are there two arrays for the single letter O? Well, this can happen with text-to-contours if the design of a single letter has two separate contours, which it does with this letter O.
I have a thin vertical rectangle for every single one of those points. What if I were to try to rotate that rectangle by whatever angle property I've got for each point? So if I'm going to rotate those rectangles, I need to also use translate and push and pop. See my videos all about transformations in P5. Same result. Let's try adding the rotate method. Well, this is interesting. This is not exactly what I expected, but it's doing the right thing. I drew my rectangles vertically, and I want to see them rotated by the angle of the contour of the letter form. So I need to draw them horizontally so that they rotate with the right orientation. Look at that. Text-to-contours doesn't just offer you the individual points for every letter form, it actually gives you the angle along the path there. There's so much you could do with that. So that's textWeight and that's text-to-contours. What about text-to-model? Let's try that one. So I've simplified this sketch back to just drawing the text choo-choo, and text-to-model requires us to use the 3D renderer, WebGL. All right, so the text is now in the wrong place because in WebGL, 0, 0 is the center of the canvas. And just out of curiosity, let's add the orbit control so I can move around this 3D space with the mouse. So there we can see the text has been rendered in 3D in a flat plane. Let's try to change it to a model. I'll call it textGeom for text geometry. TextGeom equals font.text2model. The text I want, choo-choo. The X and Y position, let's just give it 0, 0. The width, I don't know what that's going to do. Let's just give it something. And let's now see, instead of drawing the text, I'm now going to draw the model, textgeom. Okay. There it is. So I guess 100 kept it wrapped, like if I give it 600, right, it's fitting it into some sort of box. So this doesn't look that different. If I put a fill, does it color it in? Yes. Okay. So it created the model based off of all the properties that I'm putting beforehand, but it's not that different than just drawing it onto a flat plane. However, it really is because there's all sorts of 3D functionality that you could apply to it if it's a model. And we can now look at the properties, the options that we could add here. One of which is called extrude for extrusion. And let's just try giving it that. Now you can see, look, it's thick. Let's give that a 50. And maybe let's fill it with an alpha and give it a stroke. Oh, that's super fun. Okay, well now you could go so much further with this just by having access to the 3D model made out of your text. And then I should also point out there's the other property here. You can also add in sample factor. So if I made that 1, we can see the level of detail now in terms of the letter form is much higher than if I were to make this 0.1, which I guess was the default. That looks like what I had before, but if I went like 0.03, we can see the geometry has become much more primitive here. Okay, so you've learned how to load a font from Google Fonts, adjust its variable weight with textWeight, sample the points along the outline, the contours, the paths of the letter forms with textContours, as well as turn your text into a 3D model. So I hope that you will take all of these options and make something creative with it. And if you do, please share it with me on the Coding Train website in the Passenger Showcase, link in the description.